When do we start relationships from people who are breaking and entering? I don't think that's realistic at all.
I do at least once a week, so that's just me.
Welcome to Rom-Com Bomb, a Sex Ed with DB podcast series where in every episode we go under the covers with a beloved rom-com, strip away its hidden toxic messages, and rewrite the script on love and sex. Let me tell you about one of my favorite pleasure products retailers out there, Lion's Den. If you haven't heard about Lion's Den before, I cannot wait to tell you about them now. Lion's Den opened its first retail facility in Columbus, Ohio in 1971. That's right, over 50 years ago. Since then, they have grown to more than 50 outlets throughout the US, building their reputation on high-quality products, low prices, and a knowledgeable sales staff who can help you find the perfect toy. One of the many things I love about Lion's Den is that they advocate for a sex-positive perspective on intimacy and sexual well-being, and strive to break the stereotypes and stigma surrounding sex by providing comprehensive educational resources to empower everyone to enjoy life to the fullest. They are simply amazing. Lucky for you, Lion's Den is giving my listeners an exclusive discount of 15% off your purchase in-store and online with code SEXEDWITHDB at lionsden.com. What are you waiting for? Get your amazing Lion's Den toy now. Do you ever want to get intimate with your partner, but just kind of feel something telling you that you're not super into it and not sure how to get the spark back? Let's talk about Aria. Aria is a service for couples that makes it easy to break out of routine, deepen emotional connection, and energize their relationship with curated experiences called scenes. You will also receive access to the Aria Concierge, who's like your relationship's wingman, a real person who feels out your vibe and serves up spicy monthly experiences for two. Pause this episode now and visit arya.fyi and use code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off. Flicking the bean, jilling off, menage a moi. All of these are creative and hilarious ways to say masturbation. For 21 days, I embarked on what started as a personal masturbation experiment with one of my all-time favorite vibes, the magic wand. The goal? To answer one burning question. What is the impact of daily magic wand use on my health, wellness, and sexual experiences compared to regular sexual activity and no sexual activity? Spoiler alert. The results were so surprising, they've inspired me and the Magic Wand team to turn this experiment into a full-fledged study. Now, 1,000 other people are diving deeper into how consistent self-pleasure affects everything from mental health to sexual satisfaction. Want to see the hypotheses and the results from my study? Head to sexedwithdb.com/magicwandexperiment to check it out. Let me guess. You have a life and a job that you love, but the one thing missing is love itself. If you want to take your dating journey seriously this year, we highly recommend checking out Dating Intentionally anywhere you get your podcasts. Dating Intentionally is hosted by Talia Corin, who's on a mission to make dating fun and help you date with confidence. Talia pulls from her own experience going on 64 first dates in just 10 months, which ultimately led to her getting married. She's also joined by therapists, coaches, experts, and educators like me. I had a great conversation with Talia on her show all about incorporating sex toys in the bedroom and so much more. If you're looking for practical, no-nonsense advice that you can apply to your dating life today, you can listen to Dating Intentionally on Tuesdays and Fridays on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rom-Com Vom. I'm your host, DB, sex educator, pleasure expert, and rom-com critic. And today we are joined by Caitlin Durante. Let me tell you about her. She is a comedian, writer, and co-host of the Bechdel Cast, a podcast that examines movies through an intersectional feminist lens. Caitlin and her co-host Jamie have spent years analyzing how movies treat their female and queer characters, and they are basically Rom-Com Bomb's cool older siblings, if you will hold that title. Caitlin is the perfect guest to help us tear apart some of our problematic favorites. Welcome to the show, Caitlin. Hello.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll be your big sister.
Are you down for that title?
Yeah.
This is the first time I'm mentioning this to you. It's too sudden.
No, I accept.
Oh, I'm so happy that you're here, that you accept our bid to be our cooler older siblings. And I'm so excited to get into this problematic favorite today. Holy cow. Here is the teaser from last week. Today, we are talking about a film that launched an entire comedy empire. and it almost got scrapped after test audiences called it, quote, too mean, until one simple change saved the movie, which we will get into that simple change at the end of the episode. But today, we're reviewing The 40-Year-Old Virgin, Caitlin.
Boo.
Immediate booze. How excited are you to talk about this movie?
I love to just fillet a movie. And I said in an email that I'm going to place it under citizen's arrest. So
Yes.
I'm very excited to do that. It's kind of my favorite thing to do.
I laughed out loud, by the way, when he said that. Citizen's arrest! 2 exclamation points, like I read it very loudly. Yeah, I am just beyond thrilled to be talking about this film. Because we'll get into it, but I just have seen this movie so many times as a child, which is kind of crazy. And I'm so glad that we're actively rewiring our brains to understand how really terrible a lot of parts of this film are.
Indeed.
And a quick refresh, if you haven't watched it lately, my dear listeners, here is a quick recap. Steve Carell plays Andy, a 40-year-old electronics store employee whose coworkers discover that he's never had sex. What follows is their well-meaning but often misguided attempts to help him lose his virginity until he meets Catherine Keener's Trish, who helps him understand that meaningful connection matters more than just losing it. More on the one simple change that saved the entire movie, as I said, at the end of the episode, so be sure to stick around. But we're going to dive into our first segment right away, Caitlin, because we don't have time to spare, okay?
We really don't.
We
There's
don't.
too much.
This is critical. As a kid, right? So as a kid, this movie came out 20 years ago. So however old you were, whatever kind of youth that you were, I want to know, like, what is your experience when you first watched this film? What do you remember?
So I was a freshman or sophomores, the next one. I was like, what is it called?
What's after that?
And how sophomoric of me to forget. But I was that age in college. So I was like 18, 19 when this movie came out. I believe I saw it in theaters, although it was so long ago that I truly can't remember.
Right.
But it came at a time, both in my like life and comedic sensibilities and just like culturally, where I was like, yes, this is relevant. This is funny. And I think I like, although I would never have considered myself a fan of this movie, but coming off of a stream of like 90s and early 2000s rom-coms and teen rom-coms that skewed more like, first of all, they weren't funny generally. They didn't have jokes. They were tonally light, so they were considered comedies. But I was like, where are the jokes in these rom-coms? So to me, by 2005 standards, I was like, at least this has jokes. At least they're attempting comedy. And it was at a time where culturally a lot of these jokes were, quote unquote acceptable, even though by today's standards, they're horrendous. Right. And I just liked this version of a rom-com better. And I was also dealing with a lot of internalized misogyny. So I was like, yeah, I like it when boys are the protagonists. All these rom-coms where it's a woman, I can't relate.
Boring,
which right, I was like, boring. So, I've come a long way since then, but it was a very dark time in 2005. And I've had to unlearn many things since then. But I was like, again, not necessarily a fan of this specific movie, but I was into this kind of genre, this new interpretation of rom-coms kind of from a more masculine perspective.
Yes.
I don't vouch for it now, but
the Judd Apatow comedy was kind of just coming into effect
into
during
the zeitgeist.
During these like mid-aught times. And yeah, I was 12 when this movie first came out, and I am sure that did you say brag?
Yeah.
Brag. I'm sure I watched it. Like, I know this was totally like, I had an older brother. He definitely watched this movie. Like, we kind of had like unsupervised normal parent, my mom was a single mom doctor who's kind of out of the house, and I like was watching TV a lot as a kid, and I'm sure this came on one of those movie channels that we had. And I just remember feeling a lot of things, like kind of a lot, like shame about this, like the kind of awkwardness of this movie, and like the fact that we're supposed to realize that like he is a loser, he has never had sex, and he is 40. And all the sexism, like there's so much that we're going to get into. But as a kid, I think I really understood this movie to teach me in terms of like what it taught about sex and relationships when I first saw it, that like he is a loser for not having sex, and he is a virgin, and that is wrong, and that is gross, and like all of these things, right? That like he is a hairy person who needs to get waxed, like this kind of like huge waxing scene, right? Like obviously as a kid, like I'm laughing out loud when he's yelling about these like random things. I feel like that was a core memory. Okay, dare I ask, is there any element, at least one, of this film that you feel like works today in a current lens?
I was really thinking about this because sometimes if you just sort of isolate the very basic premise of a movie, you're like, okay, it's not bad. It's just all the specifics, all the details and the problematic jokes that make it so problematic. And I was thinking about this and I was like, okay, the general premise of someone who wants to have their first sexual experience or like have intercourse for the first time with the support of his friends. I mean, that's, I guess, a neutral thing, but that's as far as it goes, because like it's like not even really on his terms. It's his friends that are kind of like pressuring him to think that he needs to do this. He seems to have like a fairly content life without this. It seems like he does want to, or he did at one point want to, quote unquote, lose his virginity, which is like a term that I like don't even like. It implies that like there's something wrong with you and that you need to do whatever. So I just, to answer your question, I would say no. I would say basically nothing about this works through a like modern lens.
Sure. I think that the one thing that I feel like still holds true is like the way that these two main characters do genuinely love each other. Like I do think in general, the kind of trickery and like weirdness that Andy does throughout this film, and he's not honest with Trish, and there are a lot of problems, I think, with their communication. And she even lies to him, right? She kind of talks about her kids, and she's like, "Oh, I only have one kid. Oh, I have two kids. Never mind, I have three kids." Right? Like there's kind of this constant like questioning of like who is telling the truth here, and like you're just kind of like, is this realist, or it doesn't feel kind of like a real relationship. And then kind of when she learns that he is a virgin, she goes, oh, like that's it. Like she's very understanding of his sexual inexperience. Cut to their wedding, which of course is another, it doesn't happen that way. But I do think that it is nice that like both of them found love, and it seems like a sweet relationship, and they have chemistry and they make each other laugh. So that's, I think, the one redeeming quality.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now that we've said that, it's time. Actually, before we get into That's Problematic, I want to know, what was your rating of the film before the rewatch most recently? From 1 to 5 voms. 1, dated, mostly harmless. 5, full body cringe. We're burning all the DVDs that we have of this film.
I probably would have been like, yeah, maybe it's like a 2.5 or a 3 vom. Like I didn't remember all the very specific, like moments of homophobia, transphobia, racism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But because I did analyze this critically within the past few years, I knew
you knew better.
High vom rating.
Correct. We very much, I feel like on my end and my team's end, when we were discussing this, we're kind of like, it's probably a 3. Like it's probably right in the middle of like one of those early aughts comedies that is like, has a few, of course, like homophobic jokes, because that's the classic thing that is always added in these, which is fully unacceptable. And that's what kind of brings it up to that 3 level. I'm excited to talk about we're going to get there as to what the new ratings are. But before that, let's get into our main segment of this show called That's Problematic, where we dive into what doesn't hold up in this film when it comes to, everything from
all of it.
Gender roles to sexism to, power dynamics in relationships. There are all sorts of things that we discuss. And the first thing that I want to talk about in The 40-Year-Old Virgin is the virgin narrative, right? Like virginity, you kind of mentioned this, is like a problem for his friends to solve. And there is such a shame spiral around the sexual inexperience. And, he's the nice guy, but he's a virgin. Like there's so many tropes that are going on here. Tell me your stream of consciousness thoughts about the virgin narrative here and what we're dealing with.
It is presented in a very reductive way where, like you said, it's a problem to be solved. It's unacceptable that he is a virgin, that he's never had intercourse. The way virginity is treated, and I don't even think the movie goes into this really, but the like double standard of like a woman's virginity is to be coveted, but a man's virginity, that's pathetic, and we need to fix it. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. And God, I just feel like there's so many things here with how his personality is set up, right? Like he is a nerd. He collects like collector's items, action figures that he won't open. He is scandalized by porn. And, there's just so many things that make it clear to us through specifically also these flashbacks that we're seeing of negative, like traumatic, you could call them, sexual experiences that he has had, where a girl in braces gives him a blowjob and it's painful, and that he, is with someone and she's sucking on his toe and he accidentally kicks her in the face and she said, like, you're never going to meet anyone. You're going to be alone forever. Yes. Right? And we're supposed to see these events as funny, as like a reason why, it's a justification for like, yeah, he's a loser. Why should he get with anybody? And in reality, I think it's important that we recognize kind of the harm that these tropes really bring to people around like the way in which these sexual experiences are portrayed, and just how, they are not treated as, a two-way street. There's no communication. There's no real like conversations around pleasure. It just is missing so much here.
Truly. Yeah. No conversations around pleasure, no conversations around consent.
Right.
Nothing like that.
And then he meets Trish, right? And so he meets her, and she kind of is coming off of a string of dating these guys who she feels like all they want to do is get in her pants, basically, is like what we learned from her. And she goes, maybe we should, they're like starting to get hot and heavy. He can't figure out how to put the condom on, which is a whole other fantastic scene. I feel like that scene could easily be dissected in a sex ed class and be like, and here's how you put a condom on correctly.
Totally.
But like, her kid walks in on them and she's so embarrassed. And, basically Trish is like, I think we should slow down for a little bit. And Andy says, I think that's an amazing idea, because he's intimidated by having sex with her.
Totally.
And, they say, okay, we'll do 20 dates before we have sex. I'm curious to get your take on this premise here.
I mean, if that is something that two adults want to do and they mutually agree upon it, that is fine. Wouldn't be me.
Right.
As someone who classically has sex on the first date rather frequently.
Fantastic. Why not?
Thank you so much. Is it on your terms? Who, like, you're agreeing to if you do want to sort of implement let's go on this many dates. I think that, like, it's actually probably a good idea and something that I should do more of, like, getting to know someone before I trick my brain with oxytocin by having sex with them.
Sure.
'Cause I often have tricked myself into liking someone that I don't actually like that much because I've had sex with them. But, that's neither here nor there.
Can I ask more on that, though? Because
Yeah,
I think
please.
I'm curious about this. So do you feel, though, that like maybe you do like having sex with them, or is it just that you like having sex in general? Like where's the distinction between, like, say you have sex with someone and you're like, oh, maybe I like this person because we've already had sex, but is it because of the sex, or is it because it's the sex with that person?
I don't know. That's what
Hard to
my
say.
brain is tricking me with.
And then there's their personality, of course, which is a third factor.
And then when I do hang out with them, if I am hanging out with, XYZ person more, who I have already had sex with, and then I'm like, wait a minute, I don't think I like your personality. I think I just like have some weird chemical attachment to you because of oxytocin. I used to do a stand-up joke about this. Anyway, it's complicated. This isn't about me, but but like, if two people want to, say, let's wait for 20 dates before we have sex or get physical in any kind of way. I guess we see them kissing,
right,
up until that, but
that's a good point, actually. We should dig into that. So, like, this virgin construct, right? It's like very white, patriarchal, Christian kind of,
penis in vagina, penetrative.
That's what sex is. And
yeah.
I think, like, as people who like to talk about queer education and queer sex education, both of us, I think, like, it's important to recognize where, obviously, one out of many pieces here, this movie falls flat, which is, like, there is no discussion of, like, what a queer sexual experience could be like when we're thinking about quote unquote sex. If we're only talking about it in the sense of P and V, that leaves out a lot of sexual experiences.
Totally.
And so I really like to make sure that people know that, like, sex is an umbrella term for all sorts of things, for typically where the genitals are involved, but that doesn't need to have penetration. It means touching, licking, sucking, all sorts of different things,
all the
using
verbs.
toys, all the verbs. And so, yeah, that's obviously, like, not included in this virgin narrative at all.
Right. Yeah. And right. It's like, how do you even define virginity and by whose standards? The movie has no interest in that. It's just like hetero, penetrative, penis and vagina sex that equals losing your virginity.
Right. Which is I would just love to say here and now, it's a fucking construct and we need to let it die. And it's not helpful for anybody.
Yes. So there's that. Another thing the movie does is, like, with the Trish character specifically, is it's like, okay, well, she is someone who she is one of the few women, maybe the only woman we see on screen, who we are meant to respect, basically. Like, she's the respectable person, and that's why it's okay that he's dating her and falling in love with her. But every other woman we see on screen is like, we are not meant to take this woman seriously. She is a plaything. She is his boss, who is, like, sexually harassing him at work. She
Jane
is
Lynch.
The Jane Lynch character. Like, justice for Jane Lynch. What are we doing? There's, like, the Elizabeth Banks character, where there's an extended scene. So not this time of rewatching the movie, but when we watched it for the Bechdel Cast episode, I, like, accidentally rented the director's cut. So there's, like, some scenes that are extended, and there's a scene where Elizabeth Banks, we see this scene in the, like, theatrical cut where she's, like, in the bathtub and, like, starting to pleasure herself.
I'm so glad you're bringing this up. It's like, I paid you to do this. Keep going.
So we see this, and, like, Andy, the Steve Carell character, is just observing her and being like, okay. There's an extended version of this scene. Either that, or I was just sort of drifting off because I was like, I can't handle this movie. I need to pass out. It's making me, like, lose consciousness.
Right.
Right. But I think this is in the extended version where she is so horny and oblivious that, like the Seth Rogen character comes in and those other guys, and she's just like, ooh la la, who are you boys? Meanwhile, they are perfect strangers invading her house.
Correct.
But she's just written in such a way where she's so horny and oblivious where she's just like, come in here and fuck me. It's just like
crazy.
In what world?
It's
in
wild.
what world would this happen?
Completely. And also, I have to take back what I said earlier about the one thing that this movie gets right, because Andy fucking cheats on her with Beth. Andy cheats on Trish with Beth.
Right.
And they're like making out in Beth's apartment. And yes, let's talk about this hot tub scene, or this whatever bath scene that she is getting into, because basically, okay, let's back up. Beth is someone who works at a bookstore, and Andy is basically just using Beth, like the scene, the writer is just using Beth as like you said, a plaything in order for Andy to first practice pickup lines, where he's not even really saying anything in this bookstore. He just is repeating what she is saying, because women just like to talk about themselves, and we have no substance other than that, which is introduced very early on in the film. And we learn later that, you know, after Andy and Trish, you know, have a fight, and Andy goes to the bar or goes wherever, you know, he gets drunk, and then he goes home with Beth. And Beth gets in, you know, they start making out. Again, Andy cheats on Trish and don't like their relationship anymore. Bad communication. We don't assume they have an open relationship at this point. So it's out. So I take everything I said back. And Beth starts to pleasure herself with the shower head in the bathtub. And she has an orgasm. Yeah. And this is one of the few like legitimate kind of depictions I feel that I have seen of a woman masturbating and being into it. And she's not ashamed of it, right? Which is kind of a cool part. But then she's depicted as this freak, right? Like,
right.
Okay. What do you have to say about
counterpoint. She is shown as enjoying herself and like feeling shame-free about masturbating in front of him. But this whole scene is framed as a joke. This whole scene is framed as, look how weird this is. Look how weird she is for behaving this way.
Right. And he says it. He's like, she's a freak.
Yeah.
He says it to his friends who randomly come into her apartment and, yeah, like you said, break in. What are you doing here?
She's totally fine with these three strangers being in her bathroom, watching her naked and jerking off. And she's just like, ooh la la, come and join me. And then
I know.
In the wedding at the end, she is seen making out with Seth Rogen as if they have gotten together.
Right.
And we're just like,
because he broke into her house. Like, when do we start relationships from people who are breaking and entering? I don't think that's realistic.
I do at least once a week, so that's just me.
I'm about to get personal here, so listen up. I'm going to tell you a fun fact about me that you definitely didn't know. The lube that I use most consistently is Uber Lube. I really mean it. If you were here with me right now, I'd tell you to go over to my nightstand drawer and tell me what you see. That's right, you would see a bottle of Uber Lube. If you've never heard of Uber Lube, let me tell you about it. Uber Lube is a silky smooth silicone-based lube recommended by leading doctors, and its body-friendly ingredient list makes it widely used by people with sensitivities to lubricants. Another amazing thing about Uber Lube is that it doesn't leave a sticky residue like water-based lubes do. It lasts for a long time and doesn't stain clothing or bedding. I have 3 bottles of Uber Lube on my bedside table right now, ready when I need it. If you're someone who wants to feel more pleasure in the bedroom, use code SEXEDWITHDB for 10% off at uberlube.com. So you've been with your boo for a while and the spark feels like it's kind of gone. But what if I told you I could take away the mental load of figuring out how to, quote, spice things up by doing the work for you and sending you everything you need? That's where Aria comes in. They set you up with a dedicated concierge, aka a real person and not a robot, who is available anytime you need them, and sends tips and tricks weekly, as well as a monthly box of goods based on your needs sent directly and discreetly to your door to help you get started. Visit arya.fyi and use code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off now. Let's get that spark back. What if I told you that I did a masturbation experiment with the magic wand and the results were incredible? Don't believe me? Let me share a few things with the class. When using the magic wand every day, I experienced less stress, anxiety, and physical tension. I reported more frequent positive moods when using the magic wand every day, including higher levels of confidence. My level of horniness increased over time when using the magic wand every day. And get this, the magic wand team was so excited by my study that now 1,000 people are doing it too. Stay tuned for those results soon. Want to see how else the magic wand impacted me positively? Go to sexedwithdb.com/magicwandexperiment to learn more. There's just so much more to get into in this movie, but I just have to name like a few other things while we're here. And then we're going to transition to the cringe corner, which is like one specific line or joke or like something that you can remember or like moment where you're just like, this is so bad. So the last thing I want to say, like Paul Rudd's character, David, is like stalks his ex-girlfriend, aka Amy, who's Mindy Kaling's character.
Yeah.
And this is supposed to be seen as like, again, like she cheated on him. So we're supposed to be able to justify why he is stalking her and why he is using violent language, honestly, about her. Mm-hmm. And it's just such a strange part of the film. And I wonder, can you make sense of any of this at all? This character?
I certainly cannot make sense of it. I see it as this was just what we thought was comedy back in 2005. There was such rampant sexism and homophobia and racism that all of these characters are like regularly displaying. And that was thought to be edgy and funny. And so that's what's in the movie. Misogyny is hilarious. Stalking a woman and calling her a bitch is actually comedy. That's what we all thought. Or at least that's what Judd Apatow thought back in the day. And because this movie, I meant to re-look up how it performed at the box office, but I think it was like
very well
a smash hit.
I think that's right.
So a lot of people, I think, agreed that this was comedy. Let me quickly look it up. But it's that character stalking his ex-girlfriend, and then you have like the Romani Malco character, whose name is Jay. He just like routinely cheats on his girlfriend, and that's presented as being like, well, that's guys will be guys, boys will be boys,
right?
So
we have so
sorry,
many
I could keep going on so many tirades, but
no, this is good. I mean, I think for the cringe corner, I would like to mention the scene with the sex worker and how transphobic that whole scene was.
Oh my
and the implication here is that like, okay, well, if Andy can't do this himself, then his friends are going to hire a sex worker who is a trans person. That's what we're meant to believe. Mm-hmm. And then they spent an entire next scene being transphobic about this trans sex worker. And that was probably one of the harder parts to watch for me in the whole movie.
Absolutely. And I will say that in the extended version, the director's cut, the scene where Andy is interacting with this trans sex worker goes on longer, and he is like awful to her on screen. There is the scene where I think it's Seth Rogen and Paul Rudd, their characters, are going back and forth and being like,
do you know how I know
you're gay?
Yeah.
And I would need to double check this, so don't exactly quote me on this, but I think I remember reading that a lot of that scene was improvised.
I think that's
so. That's just what those actors, that was just in their brain. That all that homophobia, that wasn't even like written lines for the actors to perform. That was just those guys being homophobic in their real lives.
Yeah.
So you hate to see it.
You do. I think with using the word gay and the F word as, a way to joke with people was so common 20 years ago, was so common 10 years ago, is still so common in many circles today. And it is wild how offensive it is, and yet like people are still routinely using these slurs. And it's just one of the most kind of like shocking differences I feel between like early 2000s comedies and now is like just how it's in every one of them. They're them joking about, the word gay and using it as a slur. And it's just like a given that it's going to be in a comedy. What's like one main way that you would rewrite this? Is it like a certain scene? Is it a certain character? Is it the general arc? Like what are we changing here?
First of all, would be more on their terms. They're not going to let like their toxic, gross friends wouldn't be the ones being like, this is a flaw of yours that you need to fix. It would be something that they would be like, I'm finally ready, or like the time has come. I want to pursue this for myself because this is what I want. If they do seek out anyone's help, it would be from people who understand consent and who respect women. If it is indeed a woman that he wants to have this sexual experience with, it would not have all of this weird like slut shaminess that's attached to several of the characters. It wouldn't have the like anti-sex work sentiment that is attached to that sex worker scene where the idea is like, well, you're too pathetic to like, have sex with a quote unquote real person. Right. So we're going to get you this sex worker because that's blah, 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 all the implications there. Right. So we would eliminate all of that. And it would be something that this person is experiencing and pursuing on their own terms. And whether or not it's with someone that they like develop a loving, close, intimate, emotional bond with or not, I don't think is that relevant, because there's also this sort of idea where it's like, well, it's only okay to have sex with people you're already in love with. And for many people, that's true, and that's totally fine. But it doesn't have to be that. You can have casual sex, and there shouldn't be any shame or stigma attached to that as long as both parties are consenting adults. Right. So I think like whether or not it develops into this like very hyper romantic love story is kind of irrelevant.
I agree. I think it's so hard for me to grasp like same with you, like what I would rewrite, because it just feels like it needs to come from all angles. Mm-hmm. And I think like I do like the idea just in general, back to the virgin narrative, of just like simply embedding the fact that like this is a choice and like it is not disgusting. It is not a problem. It is not something to be fixed. Mm-hmm. It is something to explore. And I just think like if that changed, then I think a lot of the tone of the rest of the movie would change, along with all of the other changes that would need to be made. Right. This takes us to the end where we're gonna rate the film now. Now that we know our current day, 1 to 5, Caitlin, how many bombs are you giving this?
Honestly, it's 5. Yeah, I truly can think of very little that's redeemable about this movie, and so much of it is steeped in misogyny, sexism, that's the same thing, ? Homophobia, transphobia, anti-sex work, just like defining racism, sexuality and virginity and all these things in very, very like prescriptive, binary, heteronormative terms. It's like just every problematic thing under the sun that you can think of. It's all not only present, but like pervasive in this movie.
I completely agree. This was a pretty rough rewatch, and I'm looking forward to not really having to think about this film maybe for another 20 years. What if we did another every 20 years a rewatch?
Fingers crossed.
And I want to share the trivia teaser deets from early on so that people can know what exactly happened with this film. So,
yes, because I don't know about this.
I'm excited.
I don't think.
So early test screenings almost derailed the entire film because audiences found Andy's friends cruel and unsympathetic. So this is kind of what we're talking about throughout the whole movie of like, and it was worse before, right?
So they're awful in the current version of the movie. So they were worse back, like
they
before?
were worse to him. And so the solution was adding in some small moments where the friends reveal their own insecurities about relationships. So somehow that was enough when Paul Rudd was talking about talking about what a slut his ex-girlfriend is, were those quote small moments of redeemability. And when Jay's character starts crying and talking about how insecure he was, that, it was enough. And it saved the movie. And it created the template for what we now know as the bromantic comedy, the bromance. And the film went on to fundamentally change how Hollywood approached comedy in the 2000s. Thanks, Judd Apatow and Steve Carell. You did it. Before, Caitlin, we let you go and have you share where folks can find you, let me share next week's trivia teaser right now.
Please.
So this 2001 rom-com made J-Lo the highest paid Latina actress in Hollywood history, launched Matthew McConaughey into leading man status, and taught us that the best way to fall in love is saving someone from death by dumpster, ? So, maybe think in your heads what that might be and look forward to next week. And my lovely listeners, if you have a rom-com that you remember from growing up, submit it to us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and leaving a comment on Spotify. Caitlin, thank you so much for being here today. I am so thrilled that you were our in-house expert here today on all things that are problematic in films for 40-Year-Old Virgin. And where can folks find and listen to you?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute treat and delight. You can follow me. The main social media I vaguely engage with these days is Instagram. It's just my name, @Caitlin Durante. And you can check out the Bechdel Cast, which I co-host with Jamie Loftus. We talk about movies in a very similar way, examining them through a very similar lens. But we do all genres. So if you're like, what about this movie that's an action movie, or this, we cover it all. We've covered over 500 movies. So if you've got a movie you want to hear us talk about, chances are we've already done it. And I teach screenwriting classes. So if you want to learn how to write a movie that's not as problematic as 40-Year-Old Virgin, you can take a screenwriting class of mine, and you can find information about that on my website, CaitlинDurante.com.
I love it. Wow, you're leading the next generation of non-problematic writers.
I'm trying.
Epic. Caitlin, thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you.
Our creator, host, and executive producer is me, Danielle Bezalel, aka DB. Our producer is Sadie Leegee. Our communications lead is Catherine Cohen. Our music theme is by Hook Sounds. Thanks so much to our featured guests, partners, and listeners. If you have a rom-com you remember from growing up and want us to cover it on Rom-Com Bomb, submit it to us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and leaving a comment on Spotify. Want to partner with us? Email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. For more sex ed content, follow us on Instagram @sexedwithdbpodcast. See you next time.